Hello, everyone. This is Chris Connolly and Lainey Mays with the HarperCollins Library Marketing Team. Thank you all for joining us. We have an absolutely spectacular episode of Door to Door today with two very special authors. We have Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney, New York Times bestselling author of The Nest and the upcoming Good Company, which is on sale April 6th. And then we have Elizabeth McCracken, award-winning author of short stories, novels, including her most recent novel, BOWLAWAY, which was your first novel in over 20 years, correct, Elizabeth? And now we have a new short story collection, the SOUVENIR MUSEUM, which is coming April 13th. So thank you both so much for joining us today. We're absolutely thrilled.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, both novels both books, are both receiving incredible acclaim early on. So we're thrilled about that. Librarians, if you are watching, please do ask questions. Those of you who do ask questions, we'll send you an early copy of both titles. So very exciting there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk to Elizabeth first, and then we will talk to you, Cynthia. But before we put Cynthia in the green room, Elizabeth, Cynthia, anything you want to say to librarians who are watching?
Well, I would just like to say before I talk to you in a few minutes that I was a library kid. I'm so excited to be here. The first place I was allowed to ride my bike by myself was the library. And so I am, libraries are very close to my heart. So I'm very excited to be talking to everyone today.
And I mean, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here with Cynthia, whose work I love so much. I just have gotten a copy of her new book, which I'm excited about. I am a lapsed librarian, a non-practicing librarian. I have my MLIS and worked in libraries off and on from the time I was 15 until I was in my 30s. And I love libraries and librarians, and I miss them so much. And that, I mean, I miss them now in 2020 and 2021 when I only get to see my my friends, the librarians, when we Zoom, but not in situ, and I miss it.
And I totally buried the lead, Elizabeth. I had no idea that you were a librarian, lapsed or otherwise. That's fantastic. And I do just want to acknowledge viewers, just to take a second to acknowledge that we know yesterday was a harrowing day for us in the country. And I think this is a gift we have to be able to share this hour with these great authors, but we do just want to acknowledge the stress and the trauma that many of you likely felt with yesterday's events. And I just thank you again for joining us. I think this is just what we need. And we're really excited to get started. So Cynthia, again, we'll put you in the virtual green room with the virtual shrimp cocktail and virtual M&Ms. So do enjoy, and we'll see you in about 2025, okay?
Great.
All right. Okay, so Elizabeth, again, thank you for joining us. We're so thrilled. Again, you are a singular author. Of course, you're known for your fantastic short stories. I'm going to read your full bio because I think it's worth reading. You're the author of 6 books: BOWLAWAY, Here's Your Hat, What's Your Hurry, The Giant's House, which was the National Book Award finalist, Niagara Falls All Over Again, your memoir, An Exact Replica of a Figment of My Imagination, and Thunderstruck and Other Stories, which was a winner of the 2014 Story Prize and longlisted for the National Book Award. 3 of your books were New York Times notable books. You've received grants and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment of Arts. You have served on the faculty at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and you currently hold the James Michener Chair for Fiction at the University of Texas at Austin. That all sound just about right?
I think that's largely accurate, yes.
Well, you've had an incredible career, and we're absolutely thrilled when we learned that we were going to publish your first novel in 20 years, BOWLAWAY, which received so much praise, so much acclaim. What was it like returning to the novel after so much time away from that form?
I have to say delicately, I was still with the form, just writing really bad novels that went into drawers. But it was, you know, when I started writing novels after I wrote short stories, I sort of thought, oh, I'm a novel writer. I wasn't ever really a short story writer. And then I struggled with novels for a while. I wrote 2 and then I struggled. And then I thought, oh, I'm a short story writer. That's who I am. I'm really a short story writer. And it was, among other things, sort of a pleasure to think I didn't have to choose sides in this particular argument that I was having with myself. But it was also, it was very lovely to put a novel out into the world.
And
with
based
it.
on the praise, I think definitively we can safely say you are both. Not that it was ever in question, but I mean, you get starred reviews from Library Journal and Booklist for BOWLAWAY. And then we have some great early reviews for your new short story collection, the Souvenir Museum, including this Kirkus starred review. McCracken proves her mastery of short fiction with these 12 tightly structured, searingly realistic stories. Enduring love, along with the urge to resist it, is this volume's common theme, whether in relationships between parents and children, lovers, ex-lovers, friends, and even in-laws. An astonishingly powerful collection worth multiple readings. I agree.
I'll be with you in a second. 3:15. Sorry.
No, quite all right.
A little bit of the school at home, work at home.
This is a slice of life.
Really
We're all dealing with it. So, I mean, that's what Kirkus has to say about the Souvenir Museum, but I think what people really want to hear is from you. What could you give viewers kind of an overview of the Souvenir Museum and the collection and the stories within?
Sure. So I live in Texas with the nice creature who just opened the door and her older brother and my husband, Edward Carey, who's also a novelist and illustrator. And we were in Austin during the year, and then we travel a lot. And I was essentially, every time we traveled, I would write a short story about whatever place we had gone to. So there's one in Galveston, and there's one in Denmark, and there's one on the Isle of Mull off the coast of Scotland. And I think probably anybody who writes short stories has this moment when you think, all right, either all of these stories are too similar, or maybe I'll start to kind of think about it as a theme. And so I was thinking already about a collection of short stories that were about travel, which now it almost feels like science fiction to me in our current historical moment. And then, so that's about half the stories. There's one story that's called Birdsong from the Radio, which is older and doesn't quite fit any of those categories. But I had a bunch of stories that took place in different places around the world. And then I quickly, because I had a deadline that I had sort of forgotten about, and got a lovely note from my editor saying, oh, are you going to put this book in on time? And I thought, oh, yes, sure. And I started writing a series of connected short stories. There are 5 of them in the book that are about a married, eventually married couple, a man and a woman, over sort of the course of their relationship. And there's a lot of travel in that too.
And I could feel the theme connecting these stories, but really something that really struck me was the points in life that these characters are occupying. There's so many different people, you know, an aging father who is maybe showing signs of Alzheimer's or dementia. He's just kind of, he's finding himself lost in the past. And then you have his son, of course, and they're on a trip, I believe in Scotland. And you have a young woman who is kind of reeling from a broken heart, who's spending the night in a motel, who's I think 26. And then you have a story of a young boy coming of age who is also kind of run from America to the UK and wants to learn to be a ventriloquist. So, and that's just a sampling. So I'm just curious what it's like writing from all these different viewpoints and occupying those spaces, because it's so beautifully done.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I don't, I'm not sure. I always feel like if there's ever a line that I'm crossing when I'm writing about a character, if I'm aware that it seems different or far away from me, I won't be able to do a particularly good job of it. But I also, particularly with short story collections, I want to make sure they're not all about the exact same sort of person. Um, Partially because as a reader, I feel like I personally go to short story collections for something different than I go to novels for. And so I mean, that's not quite true because in fact, everything I write is like overfilled with too many people and too many time frames and too many pieces of furniture. I like to read books that are quite spare and not crammed full, but I really like to write books that are crammed full. But there's some pleasure because I wrote, you mentioned the story A Splinter, which is about a guy who goes to England and tries to become a ventriloquist. And that is a story that I wrote after I wrote a story about him as a grown-up. It's one of the connected short stories. And there's a real, I don't think I can put it any other way than it's really fun to write something about a character who you know from earlier on, and that you're suddenly figuring out, oh, that's why he's that way. Oh, that is how he'd be like when he was a kid. And it's one of those things. I know that some people talk about writing being hard, and it can be very hard a lot of the time, but there's also a huge pleasure for me, and that kind of thing, that sort of flying through time and space as a writer is just, I find hugely pleasurable.
And speaking of, the novel versus a short story, I mean, do you ever start these stories thinking you're going to delve into a novel, or are those very separate spaces for you when you kind of enter upon the task of writing?
For me, they're very separate. I know there are a lot of writers for whom they're not, that they feel more of a connection. But to me, and I do feel like with every single writer, whenever they say something about writing, they really just mean, peculiarly for me, they feel like different forms, or they feel like that short fiction is closer to poetry than a novel is. There's a lot of bleeding and overlap too, but I feel like, particularly with characters, I would find it hard to take a short story character and put them into a novel because they're just not big enough. When I teach, I often tell my students it's like organ transplantation. It's not that a small heart is lesser than a big heart. You just can't use a small heart to power a big body.
Yeah. And so, and I'm just curious, so you're considered, and you are a master of the short story form, and you've been doing it a while. Between your debut collection and now, has your relationship, inevitably things change, but has your relationship with the form and how you approach it changed dramatically?
I think it really has. And more than between writing my first novel and the novel that I'm working on right now. And I think part of that is I do think, particularly with short fiction, the way you write short fiction has to do a little bit with how you experience the world. And it's not that I think, oh, I've gotten much better. It's just different. And one of the things that's different is that my earlier short stories were largely first person, but a lot of them took over many years. And now my short stories tend to be shorter, and they're over shorter periods of time, and there's more event in them. And I think that's just because I understand event differently now, being multiple decades older than I was when I wrote my first book.
Yeah.
And I teach, and I feel like I've thought about short story form from more different angles now than I did when I was younger.
Yeah. And there are certain themes and topic in this collection that are, they're serious, and they're dark, and there's sadness there. But I think throughout your work, there's this just kind of, the sense of humor is there, and it's done so with such balance, and I just love it. Like, I can chuckle and cry at the same time. I'm just curious, like, how you go about doing that. Is that something you're conscious of? Is that something, are you inspired by authors growing up who were able to accomplish that?
I think I heard Nick Hornby at the Texas Book Festival talking about his new novel, and he said basically, it's a character. He might have said character fault. That I can't imagine being able to write anything without putting jokes into it, in the same way that I can't imagine existing in this wicked, wicked world of ours without constantly making jokes and looking for jokes and for people who make jokes. But yes, it's another thing that's fun.
And I have to ask, because the opening story in this collection deals with a young, a relatively newly wedded couple visiting, and his family is very British and they love their potty humor, and she didn't take kindly to that. So I'm curious what your personal thoughts on that are. Is that you projecting, or is that targeted at the character?
It's very funny because although, and I need to make this very clear, the couple in the stories are not autobiographical at all, but some anecdotes are highly autobiographical. That's actually another big difference, is that early on my stories were like emotionally autobiographical, but about people different from me. And now they're not emotionally autobiographical, but there's a lot of detail that I've drawn from real life, including many, that particular story you're asking about is 80% based on actual anecdotes collected over many years of being married to an English person. And I've come around to it clearly, because there's a lot of potty humor in that story. It was actually rejected from a major literary magazine for being pathological.
Oh, well, it's to our benefit that it eventually found its way to this collection, because I think it's a great way to introduce the reader to your sense of humor and the sensibilities of the collection as a whole. It's just fantastic. So, and I do want to get to some questions from librarians. I could go on. And this is what actually I did want to ask, and you probably can't give this away, but Barbara Ringel asks, one of our viewers, are any of the characters based on people you have personally encountered in your travels?
Yes. Not any of the important characters, but there is don't know if it's wise to say this, but there's like a children's performer on a boat who is a children's performer who I saw on a ferry from Holland to England. It's sort of like at that level. There's nobody I know personally, I don't think, in any of the stories. And I have in the acknowledgements, I have a big disclaimer for all of my in-laws, because there are in-laws in the story and they are not my very lovely in-law and welcoming in-laws. It might be just, maybe it is just that one, that they're like background characters who are, because again, there's a lot of travel. So probably anybody who appears in a museum was actually in a museum I was in at one point.
And we have a question from our friend.
I think about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Chris, but so our librarian friend Vicki Nesting said, how did your prior career as a librarian influence your writing?
Well, I like, as I say, I like things that are crammed full, and I like oddballs. And by that, I mean, everybody in my family, and I was a public librarian at the Somerville Public Library. And as a kid, I worked in shelving books in the Newton Free Library in Newton, Massachusetts. And I read a ton. I read probably more than I was supposed to. I was supposed to be shelving books quite a bit. And I feel like the thing about public libraries is that they're broadly democratic. Anybody can walk through the door at any moment. Things are coming in and coming out. There's in some ways, I feel like a lot of what I write is influenced by that sort of that space of a public library that's, full of old, weird public art and lovely children and horrible children and colleagues and every kind of, there are families inside a public library, and there are colleagues, and there are lonely people. And I really do feel like it has affected, both in terms of what I read when I read, I still read the authors that I first read when I was head of a circulation department, and I got to see the books come up from technical services the first day.
That's Wonderful. And she also pointed out, minus the Giant's house being set at the library. But let's see if we have, I had another one pulled up and then I lost it. Okay. Souvenir Museum. This is from Janet Lockhart, our other librarian friend. The Souvenir Museum is a wonderful collection, so much heart and very poignant. And I especially love the two stories that book in the collection. Was the order of the stories something that was carefully planned and considered?
Yes, but later on, in that I drafted, there are 5 of the connected stories, and the first and the last are both about this couple, Sadie and Jack. And I drafted the stories quite quickly. And then went, oops, you're the host now, Lainey. But I can't hear you.
I'm the host. I hope that means on Facebook we're good. So guys, yeah, I see myself, so we're good. Keep going. Sorry.
I drafted them pretty quickly, and I wrote them not quite in chronological order, but close. But the first story, The Irish Wedding, is one of the last ones that I wrote. Maybe I wrote those 2 stories, first one and then the other. And then I rearranged them and took them. I had imagined that they would be in the collection in strict chronological order of them occurring. But instead it somehow made sense because those 2 stories both have weddings in them, and they're longer and they're a little heftier than the other 3 connected stories. So yeah, I did. I was pleased when we ended up putting them out of order. And I worked with Helen Atzma, my wonderful editor, and I think that was even her suggestion that's what made sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think another question from Jennifer Winbury, which I think points something I was interested in. People kind of think short story, shorter, and I guess you automatically put together, oh, easier, which I'm sure it's not. So what's the process like, and how do you decide, like, okay, this is the end of this story that I have to tell?
One of my early and most influential teachers is Alan Gerganis, who actually has a collection of short stories out maybe next week, this month anyhow. He's an amazing writer, and he was my first teacher in graduate school, and he said, you can will a short story into life. You can't do that with a novel, which I think is sort of true. Often when I'm traveling, something will happen, and when you travel, you see the world differently, and maybe you're even more interested in it, which is one of the reasons I end up with stories based on travels. But if I have an idea, I think about it for a couple of weeks, and then I sit down and I draft it pretty quickly, and then I start to revise after that. But often it is, I sort of think, oh, I'd like to write a short story and cast around for an idea, which is completely not how I write novels. With novels, something has to be really bothering me for me to sit down and start writing.
I love that. Something really has to be bothering me to sit down and start writing. I think Chris is back. We're good?
I'm here. Yeah, sorry about that. Let's see, did we get to Janet Lockhart's question? She has a keen eye. So did we get to that yet?
Did the 2 bookend that question?
No, this is a different one.
Oh, no.
It's fresh off the press. So Janet asks, this is such a small detail to ask about, but I was wondering if the movie alluded to in Proof is I Know Where I'm Going.
It is. and it's one of those, I can say, Janet, it's one of, ICWIG, as the people who love that movie refer to it, which is why one of the reasons why we went to the Isle of Mull, because that movie is so deeply delightful and wonderful.
Okay, and I think we covered most of the questions. Just so many fans here, though, Elizabeth. So love Giant's House, other work. And Janet is thrilled that she hit the nail on the head with her question. And I know you wanted to potentially read a little. Is that true? You want
to? If we have time, I'd love to. But
yeah, absolutely. You're fine. Yes.
I'm gonna just read. This is actually an experiment because I've never read on Zoom, and I'm only going to read 2 paragraphs from the start of a story, and I'm going to read from the book because I sometimes have seen people read from their screens and their eyes go slightly glassy and weird, and it always frightens me. So pardon me while I look away from my book. It might be, look away to my book. This is just the first 2 paragraphs of a story called A Walk Through Human Heart. Some grackles might possess souls and some grackles might possess intelligence, but it was impossible to believe that any one grackle possessed both. Not enough room in their brilliantined heads. A clutch of them walked unnervingly around the parking lot outside the vintage store like a family at a hotel wedding, looking for the right ballroom. One grackle was missing a foot, and Thea blamed him for it. If they had been magpies, she might count them up, wondering what they foretold, but grackles were just seagulls and widow's weeds. They weren't omens of anything except more grackles. She was here to buy a present. The world had promised a baby, though the world broke such promises all the time, and Thea planned to become that uninteresting thing, a doting grandmother. What was doting? A sort of avian love, an affectionate pecking. Thea had already referred to the baby as my baby, and Georgia, who lived in Portland, where she'd grown up and nearly died, said, "Mom, don't be disgusting."
Wonderful.
Oh, our photo. We almost forgot to ask. So on your website, which I'm going to share right now, I saw that you have this photo on your contact page, and I want to know more about this photo.
So that is the fellow in the bear suit lying down is my Uncle Mose, would have been my great uncle, part of a family that came. He was born in the US. He had older sisters who were born in Lithuania. And my relatives always said that Uncle Mose wanted to go into vaudeville. And I just love this photo so much. I don't know what explains it. If is it Halloween? Is it a theatrical production? I do not know.
Absolutely love this.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, librarians, this has been a treat to welcome Elizabeth onto the program. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested in hosting Elizabeth for like a virtual program at your library, please contact us and we can work with Elizabeth, see if we can make that happen. The Souvenir Museum is coming in April. It is available now as an e-galley on both Edelweiss and NetGalley, so run, don't walk. It is unforgettable. And Elizabeth, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute blast, and I loved learning more about your process, your books, and you.
Oh, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Lainey.
Excellent. All right, we'll see you later, Elizabeth.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
I'm going to show while we're switching, changing, rearranging. Just a reminder, this is the Souvenir Museum cover, and we have BOWLAWAY paperback version. So just to let everyone know before we bring on.
Excellent. All right, so Lainey, we're going to bring Cynthia on if you want to introduce.
Yes. Let me pull up the jacket while you're doing that. So, hi.
Guys.
Welcome
Cynthia.
back.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Cynthia, for being here. And I just want to do a quick intro before you tell us more about the new book. I have the image of the nest, and then this is the new book company. So, Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney, she holds an MFA from Bennington Writing Seminar and lives in Los Angeles. But her debut book, The Nest, which everyone knows, is instant New York Times bestseller, spent more than 6 months on the bestseller list and sold, 1 million copies, widespread acclaim. It was the best book of 2016 by People, Washington Post, NPR, many others. It was a Barnes & Noble Discover pick and a great writer's pick and a best fiction finalist for the Goodreads Choice Award. I could keep going on, but The Nest was just so beloved. And I know all of our librarians, once we told them that your next novel, Good Company, was coming, they all immediately had to have the galley. They just had to read, and it is such an amazing read that I can't wait to hear more about it. And we have so many great quotes, but before I read any of those, I want to see if you could tell us a little bit more about Good Company.
Sure. Where do I begin? I thought I had the idea for Good Company before I even finished The Nest. I have always loved Crossing to Safety, and I was on vacation and had a sudden urge to read it again, and so I went and bought a copy, even though I had one at home, and I just I loved what Elizabeth said about something has to be bothering you about a novel, and I just kept thinking, why aren't there more novels about friendship and marriage, because it's such a big part of life. And if you're lucky enough to have couple friends, it's a joy, and it can also be complicated. So I had that idea in my mind, and I tried to work on it when before The Nest came out. Every writer I know told me to try and get work done on the book before, on a new book before The Nest came out. I really didn't get much done. I didn't get much done during the entire year I was promoting, year and a half I was promoting The Nest. I beat myself up about it a lot. By the time I sat down to try and write something new, I felt the weight of what had just happened to me in a very profound way. It felt very intimidating. And I fortunately had a very good friend who suggested that maybe I needed to take a few months off and take the pressure off of myself. And that was sort of in June of 2017, I guess. So I decided to take this summer just to read and not put any pressure on myself. And I did, and that was amazing. And of course, in the course of reading, if you are a writer, you often find yourself going to the computer or to the page or however you write. And I did, and I was working with these characters, but I could not figure out how to start the book. And every time I tried to write my way in, I felt like I was hitting a brick wall. And I wondered a lot if maybe it wasn't a great idea. And my husband had to go to Israel on business, and I went with him. And we were at a hotel on the Sea of Galilee, and I somehow, inexplicably, for the first time in my life, left my wedding ring and my engagement ring in the hotel room. And after we checked out, realized it, and I never got them back. And the heartbreaking thing about that was that I was wearing my grandmother's wedding ring. I had taken to wearing her wedding ring as my wedding ring years and years ago. And it was just a tiny little piece of white gold. It was completely, it had no monetary value, but it had extreme value to me. I was really heartbroken about it. And when I got back to Los Angeles, I told everyone the story, and everyone seemed to have a similar story. And it was often a story about a ring that had been lost. But definitely many stories about family heirlooms that had meaning, that had just fallen, a brooch that had fallen off of a coat or something like that. And I thought maybe that's how the story ends. And I sat down and started writing the opening scene, and the book just fell, the opening of the book just fell into place. And then I finally had my way in, and I won't say that it was an easy ride after that. This was a much harder book for me to write than The Nest, for probably really obvious reasons, but I really love it. If I'm allowed to say. I had to fight a lot harder for this book, and therefore maybe like your unruly child, you shower a little extra love on the one that's struggling. So
you are definitely allowed to say that. You put the hard work, and we're so glad you did continue writing, but not, we have so many great reviews. I think it's easily proven. So just to read a few, Maria Simple said, plumbs the depths of marriage, motherhood, and friendship with warmth and wit. I devoured it in one gulp. Treat yourself to some good company. Lori Gottlieb said, unforgettable characters are so real, so human, and such good company, pun intended. But I mean, there's so many great quotes. Ellen Hildebrand and Ramon Alam, who we all love so much. She's wonderful. Yeah, and he said, with candor and humor, Good Company tackles big issues, the reckoning between artistic ambition and family life, the strange tension between honesty and loyalty. And I think, you know, there are some weightier topics in this, families going through things, understanding their past, but it doesn't slow you down any, but it makes you, you want to keep turning those pages to figure out what happened, but is a lot to set and think about, I think. What was it like writing these two couples in a way and their friendship? Did that change from the beginning when you were writing to the final product?
I think I always knew from the beginning, one of the few things I knew was that there was going to be a strain on these relationships. And so once I landed on what that was, it was more how to portray the evolution of a friendship and a marriage and a friendship within two separate marriages. So, you know, it was complicated. There were a lot of Post-its and a lot of back and forth and a lot of handing a bunch of pages over to my wonderful editor, Henry Dunau, and my agent, Helen Atzma, and saying, what can you help me sort this out? Like, what goes where? And that was the big challenge of the book. And I was moving in and out of people's marriages and friendships and heads and back and forward in time. And so it was, I love that. I love thinking about structure, but it was, at times a bit of a bear.
And in between writing The Nest and writing Good Company, correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia, but you were originally in New York and now you are in LA, correct?
Yes.
Did that change of scenery and company, to not use Upon I Promise, did that change, like, where you were at writing wise? Did that impact it largely?
I actually wrote The Nest in Los Angeles.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I moved to Los Angeles in 2009, but The Nest was very much a New York book,
Mm-hmm.
and really me, allowing myself to live back in New York and to pay tribute to everything I love about New York and to jazz all the things that bother me about New York. And it really was my love letter to New York City. And I thought that Good Company was going to be set entirely in California, and it didn't work out that way. But yes, moving to Los Angeles was hugely important to me. I was not writing fiction really when I lived in New York. When I came out here and my kids were getting older and I was thinking about what I really wanted to do, I went back to graduate school. I got my MFA. That's where I started The Nest. And I don't know if I would have done those things if I had stayed in New York. I think that not just the change of perspective, but being down 25 years worth of friends was a motivation to find a community and to find something to do. And my kids were getting older, and I really wanted to figure out, like, what is this, back end of my life look like from a professional standpoint. And I had always harbored the desire to write fiction. And I think moving to Los Angeles had a lot to do with that.
Yeah. And speaking of kids getting older, in this story we have one of the couple's daughters who's in the story. And I did find that interesting to kind of see, because it's all about relationships. So it's also their relationship with their daughter, but the friend's relationship with her. So what was it like writing different ages in this story?
Well, writing the older people is easy for me because I'm old. So, they were they're very much living, excuse me, maybe they're like 10 years younger than I am now. I think I am one of the pleasures and one of the difficulties of writing into that place in their lives are because they're all at the point in their lives where they sort of realize life is not a series of unlimited options anymore. And so that was, I mean, that was kind of great. I think that's something that doesn't get written about a lot, honestly, you know, the sort kind of the middle age at this time in our lives, which is very different even from what our parents experienced, and how you think about that, and how you handle, and how you handle disappointments, and how you think about your future when your future is maybe not the thing that you thought it was going to be. And then writing Ruby, who is the daughter of one of the couples, was just an absolute, utter delight. And Ruby just, when I hear writers say things like this, I hate it because I sound so facile, and it so rarely happens. But Ruby like walked into that book, and every time I was in her head, she just started talking. And I absolutely loved her, and I loved writing her. And it was one of the few parts of the book that came very, very easily. And, you know, to the point where even my agent, who, you know, who knows me pretty well and knows that this isn't necessarily the kind of question you ask a writer, said, "Is she based on someone you know?" And I think I love teenage girls. Yeah, I don't know. Ruby was just a gift. She was a gift.
Yeah. And not to go too much back to New York and LA, but because it does take place within this theater world in New York, and then the kind of glitzier, I guess, TV movie world in LA, what was it like going between those two? And I don't know, I don't know if you have a favorite more, but TV, movies, or theater, but did you go back and forth and kind of have to do a love letter to both?
Well, I definitely love theater more. I have no problem saying that. I absolutely love theater. I miss it desperately. You know, I have friends who are in theater, and I have friends who are in TV and film, and I have friends who move back and forth. And so I have had a front seat at a lot of that, and I asked a lot of questions, and I talked to my friends, and I didn't, yeah, I don't think I thought about it as taking sides. I thought about it as how the characters felt about the choices they were making, and the compromises they were making, and, you know, again, the disappointments they were facing. And you know, it's hard. It's a hard world to live in. The rewards when it goes well are amazing, but nothing is guaranteed. You can have a hit show one day on a Friday, and it gets canceled, and on Monday you're back to zero. And it takes a certain type of person, and it takes a certain kind of passion and a certain kind of fortitude to stick with that.
Speaking of actors, I'm just so curious, writing an actor, how does that play out? Does that impact them, their believability, their interpersonal relationships? Because it feels like such a singular pursuit to be an actor, and I'm curious what that was like, delving into the mind of an actor through your characters.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I had to figure out how to write about the theater world, and I quickly figured out that writing about, say, a show or a performance didn't work. It's like one step removed from the actual exciting thing that's happening. I had just had to keep it really small and internal. And, you know, the book is really about these relationships, and the things that are happening to them in their lives. But I mean, it really, honestly, it came down to talking to people who are actors and trying to get them to open up to me, which was it was very surprising for me to understand how difficult it was for actors to talk about what they do in any cohesive way. And I think there was, in some ways, there's a reluctance to break it down because you don't want to look at it too hard, which I completely understand. And I had a friend of mine say, oh, you can't talk to actors, you need to talk to directors. They can tell you what actors do and don't do. That's great. And so I did that, but it was, you know, I mean, I took a theater workshop. I did a lot of research, and I read a lot of biographies and autobiographies of people. I read, you know, books on the Meisner method, and so by the time I sat down to write, I think I just had sort of ingested enough stuff so that I felt like I could be in their heads.
Yeah. And speaking of writing and research and your process, Maureen Roberts asked, you mentioned post-it notes and writing. What's your process like? And do you use an outline or any go-to snacks while writing?
Oh my God, snacks are very important, but I have a very analog process. I have a big bulletin board and I have different color post-it notes, and you know, they go up there kind of as chapters, maybe as scenes. I spend many days staring at it, trying to rearrange things. And it's really most useful when I have a draft and then I actually do know everything that I have, and I can look and see if I think, you know, people are getting enough time in the right places. I don't work from an outline. I wish I did, maybe that would make things easier. No, I don't have an outline. At a certain point, I think, you know, you make a lot of choices in the opening pages of a book. And so at a certain point, you've made enough choices so that you have a bunch of questions to answer. So your outline just kind of appears. But I am incapable of thinking those things through without getting them on the page first.
Yeah. I imagine people who have an outline, it has to change a lot. Like there's no way that they know.
But I also feel I just feel like you're an outline person or you're not. Like the people I know who use outlines are so really evangelical about them. And it just, I don't know, my brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah, just depends. And so Barbara Ringel asked, after completing the first book, you said it was difficult for this next one. So will you take some time, or do you already have a new project after this one?
I have had another book in my head for a while, and so I mean, I haven't written since I turned Good Company, or since I sort of finished reading the page proofs in the summer. But yeah, I know I'm going to pick it up soon. I don't feel feels like a much less fraught process for me than The Nest did. I sort of understand it. And I really understand that my part of it is over, except for this lovely part where I get to talk to people about the book. But, you know, the book goes out in the world now, and what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And I probably said that a million times about The Nest, but I didn't really feel that way about it. So I don't feel nearly as anxious or scattered as I did before The Nest was coming out. So I am eager to get back to work. So
I just want to ask Cynthia, because I thought one thing that was really brilliantly written in both your books is that they deal with finances in this really eloquent way and how they impact relationships. And so I'm just curious, what is your view on financial stability? What's it like writing that? Do you think there are answers there? Is it as simple as have money, be happy?
well, I mean, money certainly makes things easier. I don't know, you know, I mean, easier sometimes equates to happier. Not worrying about money certainly makes life easier. I just think that, you know, I grew up in a very average middle-class family in Rochester, New York. I moved to New York City and realized that there was a whole world of wealth that I thought existed in books and movies. I didn't understand generational wealth or inheritances or anything like that. And obviously I became a little obsessed with it and observing it and what it does for people, good and bad, and the access it gives. And you know, it is a little different in Los Angeles in ways I'm not even sure I have processed and could describe. But you know, raising my kids in New York and watching all of that, I thought about it all the time. I thought about it all the time. And for many years in New York City, my husband and I wondered if we could stay there, if we could have kids there, which we very much wanted to do. He fortunately got a television writing job that allowed us to do all of those things, but it felt so, it felt so arbitrary. And not to say that, like, he's an unbelievably talented person and an unbelievably hard worker, but so are a lot of other people who don't get those opportunities. And I think I think honestly what it comes down to is I have always felt so incredibly lucky. And I think I'm always questioning whether what's deserved and what's not deserved, what's earned and what's not earned. What does that mean for you as a human being, as a citizen of the world, as a family member? Those are definitely things that, you know, obsess me a little bit.
Yeah. Let's see. So Janet Lockhart asked, I was fascinated by the issues raised about how being an artist affects family life. Do you think artists face particular challenges when it comes to having both a successful family and work life?
Yes, in varying degrees, depending on what you do, because we don't live in a country that supports artists, you know, financially, or there's no safety net there. So for a lot of artists, it requires someone else in the partnership to make a sacrifice, to make the money. You know, I have a lot of friends whose spouses, and it, you know, it goes both ways. One person makes the money and the other person gets to make stuff. And it's unfortunate that that is necessary, but it's really hard to make money being an artist. It's very hard to support a family being an artist. It's hard to do it as a writer, as a painter, as an actor. You know, almost everyone who does that has some sort of other job. So yeah, I mean, there is always a tension there. And I will never forget this. In my MFA program, which was only a few years ago, well, like 10 years ago now, there was a panel of teachers who taught in the program. Somebody was supposed to come to talk to us and they had to cancel at the last minute. And so they sort of put together this ad hoc, you know, here are 4 teachers. There was like a, you know, poetry teacher, a couple of fiction teachers, a nonfiction teacher. Just ask us any questions. And it was moderated by another teacher in the program. And, you know, the questions, this is a low residency MFA program, so the ages of people really varied. And a lot of people had families and were trying to figure out how to make this work. You know, could they teach? Could they write other things? You know, could they be marketing professionals, as I was for many years? And so the questions were very practical. How do I get health insurance? How do I make enough money to support my desire to spend X amount of time in my life doing it? And all of the people on stage, 2 men and a woman, said, well, you know, each one in turn, well, none of us have kids. And I just thought, first of all, what an insane thing to tell a group of people who are sitting there who have just paid for their MFA. And also the moderator also did not have children. Like what an insane thing to say. Well, you can make art, but that's your baby, you know? So yeah, I mean, I had, at that point in my life, my kids were a little bit older. I was at a point, you know, we were financially solid. I was at a point I could do this, but I just thought, what is everyone in this room thinking at this moment? But you know.
Wow, that's fascinating. And
Yeah.
I think then this book does such a good job of exploring all of those themes, you know, the juncture of family success and success in your job and money and what those effects have on your day-to-day life and your relationships, because in this book there are
And like
strained in different ways.
Yeah, whose work it's privileged. It's complicated.
Right.
It's complicated.
Right. And it's such a beautiful read, and as you can see, librarians on here have already read and loved it so much. But I want to thank you for writing it, because the characters will stay with you, and it's an enjoyable read. But it does make you think, and I had a lot of fun puzzling some what ifs.
Good. I'm glad.
It was excellent. Yes. So Cynthia, I do want to thank you again for joining us today. And I'm so happy that we have your second book. It's coming in April. That's Good Company, Librarians. We have the link for the eGalley, as well as the audiobook eGalley, which is very cool. So that is available now. So you can
wow.
listen
Great.
early. Oh yeah. Is that news to you as well, Cynthia?
It is, yeah.
We could talk. We actually just did a podcast with somebody in audio, and they were talking about the audio book for this and how Marin Ireland is going to read it. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I just heard so many great things about the audio
Oh,
book.
I was on the phone. There is a sort of summer theater company in the book that is based on a real place. And I knew that Marin Ireland had been involved in that community. And so I really, as soon as I saw that, I didn't realize that she did audiobooks. And as soon as I saw her name, I was like, oh, please read it. So you know, listening to my own audiobook is not like high on my list of things to do, but I will take a peek.
She's a superstar. She's done several books for us that we're just all like infatuated with. She's great.
Yeah. And I'm just such a fan of her theater work and television work. And so, yeah.
Excellent. Well, again, Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. I hope in more normal times we might see you in person. But until then, best of luck with everything, and thank you for this book, and we'll see you around, okay?
So much. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cynthia. And for librarian, bye. For you librarian viewers, we do have just a few quick housekeeping notes, including a very exciting upcoming door-to-door next Tuesday, featuring two fantastic authors. We have Willie Vlotton, who we know how amazing he is. He's the author of numerous novels, including Don't Skip Out on Me, which is his prior novel before this one, The Night Always Comes, which is coming in April. He'll be joined by Andrew Graff, whose debut novel Raft of Stars is coming in March, which is like a modern day classic. It's a fantastic story of two young boys on the run following a harrowing, what they think is a crime, and they escape into the backwoods of Wisconsin. Fantastic. Two just unreal talented authors with tons of fantastic insights. So you can go to our Facebook page, sign up for the event to receive reminders. This is not to be missed. So that's going to be Tuesday, January 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I think that's all the housekeeping we have today. Is that right, Lainey?
I think so. It's been a lovely hour.
It has. So again, thank you so much to Elizabeth and to Cynthia for joining us. Those two books can be downloaded or with Good Company listened now. And library votes for both are due March 1st. So that's Good Company by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney and The Souvenir Museum by Elizabeth McCracken. So do check them out. And thank you all for joining us. Be well, be safe, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.